My name is Christine Walker, and I'm delighted to be hosting this brand new series of the stories of the afterlife for MNI Publishing. We're celebrating an important milestone as we bring you our very first book released by MNI Publishing, called Finding Purpose. And this will be the theme of all future episodes, as we present client stories from our amazing worldwide Life Between Lives facilitators. Today I am in conversation with my colleague Dr Diana Paque, our Executive Director of the Michael Newton Institute. Dr Paque has trained in hypnotherapy, regression and energy therapies at the HCH Institute in Lafayette, California, and holds certifications as a clinical hypnotherapist, Reiki master in the Usui and Kaliki traditions, regressionist, Life Between Lives facilitator, energy therapist, and quantum consciousness facilitator. Dr. Paque holds a bachelor's degree in history from Santa Clara University, a Master of Science in Library Science from the University of Southern California, and both a master's and doctoral degree in public administration from the University of Southern California. She is a member of the Newton Institute, which certifies Life Between Lives facilitators in the tradition of its founder, Dr. Michael Newton. She is also the editor of MNI's quarterly journal, Stories of the Afterlife. Dr. Paque works primarily with individuals in therapeutic settings to achieve their goals and is a trained internal family systems informed practitioner. Hello and a very warm welcome to our viewers, and this is the next episode in our series Finding Purpose. This is the companion conversation of the book of the same title and the very first book to be released under MNI Publishing. Today I'm delighted to have with me in conversation my wonderful colleague Diana Paque. Diana is our Executive Director of the Michael Newton Institute and has held this wonderful role for 5 years. So very warm welcome to you today, Diana.
Thank you, Christine. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Thank you so much. Diana, I always start with the very first question, and it's always the same for everybody else because there's always a different answer depending on what people's perception of it is. We know, and we're not blind to how challenging it is for planet Earth and the human inhabitants of planet Earth right now. Do you get a sense or a feeling or some kind of knowing that finding purpose is important in your life, or what's your take on that?
My sense is that we are all here for a purpose, and that we come in knowing that we are here purposefully and intentionally.
Yes.
We don't know what it is. We don't know why we're here. And most people, when they do work of the kind that we do, are looking for their purpose, their reason for being here, their reason for having suffering, for having joy, for struggling. And so I think the big question is always, what's my purpose? Why am I here? And so to me, it's an overarching question. It's another way of asking, what are my lessons? Why did I come here? What is this all about? And when we look at ourselves and in the way that Michael laid out, we're looking at ourselves not from inside of our incarnation, but we're looking at ourselves from a soul's level and trying to understand the connection between the soul and the incarnation and understanding the purpose of incarnating. So I think that that message of purpose is something that we as incarnated beings are always looking for. It's not a soul question. It's a me in this body question. Yeah. What's it all about? It's a very fundamental question for a human being.
Absolutely. And I know it's linked, but not entirely the same as a soul contract. I think, because we obviously have soul contracts for all sorts of reasons, like a mission. with lots of little subplots that create that mission. And of course, the mission might not be about purpose. It might be going through a different challenge. But that's amazing. Thank you, Diana. Can I ask you by the same vein then? In terms of a sense of purpose yourself, have you identified, or do you just know what your own purpose is?
I'd say my purpose, as I have found in the last, say, 10 years, is to be here to support others connecting to consciousness. That I have a light and that I've been given gifts and resources, not just for me, but for the planet. And I'm here to lead others to their purpose. And
Yes.
I've come through a variety of different activities and things in my life that have led me to this work, which I didn't look for, but it found me. And it found me when I was ready. So the purpose for me has emerged. It wasn't something I was seeking, although at the beginning of our lives, we ask the question, well, what do I want to be when I grow up?
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like, that's a kid question. It's the kid version of what's my purpose? But what do I want to be? What am I going to be? Could I have ever imagined that I was going to be doing hypnotherapy? Of course not. I didn't even know what that was. Or guiding people into deep spaces and into connection with their souls and into connection with consciousness. How could I possibly know that? And yet that's what I was drawn to. So my sense of purpose is about connecting my energy to source and supporting others in learning how to do that themselves.
Yes. A brilliant answer to that. And again, actually, then it makes me think that it is part of the soul contract. You get there in the end, don't you? Whether we call it that or not, it's part
Yeah,
of the mission, isn't it? To fulfill
it
what the
is.
soul needs to learn, grow, and evolve. Thank you. That's amazing. Diane, I wanted to say thank you and compliment you on the brilliance of the stories that you have submitted for the book. There are 4 stories, absolutely, like it's a real storytelling. There's so much detail in there. And you're really, I can feel myself when I was reading it, really resonating with each of your clients that have gone through these different experiences. So the detail of what you've written is absolutely superb. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thinking about these stories, there are 4, and I'm going to refer to my notes because they're quite detailed. So the very first story is called So Confused, and it comes under the chapter Understanding Loss, Grief, Pain and Suffering. And it involves your client, Valerie, who has a pretty complicated life, very work focused, and she's a committed Christian. And she comes to you wanting to have answers beyond what her faith can give her. Can you give me some more information about that, please?
She's an amazing woman. She found me because she felt life was so confusing, and she's one of these people who never slows down and who's always going full speed and has lots of pots that she's stirring. And what she was finding is that she had too many things on her plate, that she's a realtor, she sells houses, she was remodeling a house, she had this dream of opening a daycare center for the elderly, feeling she needed to do all of these things. She has a son and a daughter and a stepdaughter who's her niece. She's been married twice and she's in a wonderful marriage, but life was just too crowded. And so when she came to me, it was like, I don't know what to do about this. I'm being drawn into doing this work. Don't know what it's about, don't know why I'm drawn. And because she's very active in her church, she was concerned about doing work on a spiritual level that might be seen as something that would not tie to who she is as a Christian, that it might be,
Yes.
the work of the devil, and, people who are very fundamentalist Christians can say, oh, this is not God's work. And so she was really concerned about that connection of her religious self and her spiritual self, and not quite understanding the spiritual part of her. She also had just experienced the death of her mother, and her mother had dementia. And she was really concerned about her mother being able to go home because of the dementia. And as she is on this journey, she connects with her mother's soul as she goes home the first time, and she talks to her mother about her going home and is she okay? And her mother is just laughing at her because she and her husband are doing all of this maneuvering of trying to create light to push her into the light. And the mother is just going, what are you people doing? I'm already here. I don't need this extra help. She said they were dancing around like idiots, trying to get her into the light, and she's already there, and just laughing joyfully at their attempts to move her physically into the light. And she was so relieved to hear that her mother was home and was happy and was connected. Her story is very interesting because it has follow-ups to it. We did her first journey, and she was a man who was an itinerant worker who ended up being working at a woman's house, and never having found love, found connection with her, and she died fairly young, but he actually experienced love. And then in her life before she went in between lives, she was a young woman whose name was Corinne, and Corinne was someone who never married and who felt a desire to carry on the work of her mother, who was a seamstress, but also had this work to help people, wanted to be helping people. And Corinne did not live a very full life, did not have children, and felt that her life was undone. So as she came into this current life, her soul carried Corinne along with her, and Corinne's journey and Corinne's work into this lifetime. And so that one of the messages that she got was that she could let go of all of the work from lives preceding. Mm-hmm. She didn't need to bring that with her. She could just let go and simplify. So the words kept coming through.
Oh, yes, simplify.
Simplify. You don't have to do the work of previous lives. Just let it go. She also had there's so many things about her story. She had a very interesting experience that when we went into the womb, she had always had a very strong connection with her father. And her father, it felt like, she said, I don't know what the relationship is. It's almost like we've been married, or our souls have a really, really strong bond. And I don't know what that is. So when she went back into the womb, she realized that in the womb, she and her father were twins in the womb, and that the baby that she was died, and that she and her father's soul had made the commitment to be together. And so she then had to wait until her father was old enough to have children to be her father's child. But the twin relationship still existed because they'd spent time in the womb together.
Oh, gosh. How powerful. Gosh.
How can you make that? You can't make this up. It's like when people say, am I making this up? I say, could you possibly make this up?
Yeah.
It is so unique, that connection. She said, that describes it. It's that twin connection that I have with him. And I've always had with him. And I didn't know how I could have that. So, as in her life, when we look back, I had her read the story because she was one of my earlier clients. We're talking 5, 6 years ago. And so she reread it, and her life had some dramatic changes after she had her sessions. So after her mother died, she and her husband went to Paris, and her mother had a favorite bookstore in Paris, and she went to visit the bookstore. Well, in the first past life, the man's name was Hafiz, Hafiz, and in the bookstore, she found a staircase and she was going to leave her mother's ashes, a little bit of them in the staircase of the bookstore that was her mother's favorite place. And as she was going to do that, she saw on the wall a poem by a poet named Hafiz.
Yes.
So there was a poet who spoke about love. He was like Khalil Gibran, same
Yes.
kind of poet. And Hafiz wrote about love and about soul connections. And here, that's the name of the man that she was in the previous life. And here she's delivering her mother's ashes and sees this Hafiz poem.
You can't make it up.
So that was just like, oh my God, how amazing.
Oh my gosh.
And
Oh my
and
gosh.
then as her life continued, her guides had said, simplify, make your life simpler. About 2 years later, her son was murdered. And
Right.
she she was devastated. This is her only son. And he was murdered. And at that point, she was just devastated. And she had to have herself, she had to have time and space to have connection. Shortly after that, she had breast cancer.
Oh
And
my
so her
gosh.
life had the staircase effect of needing to spend time in deeper and deeper places and connect to her faith and connect to her spiritual self, that the message simplified came home in so many ways. And so she found that while the journeys themselves were important because they gave her messages, when she looked back on them later, she found that the messages were there for her as she moved forward. It just wasn't in the moment, but
Mhm.
that message to simplify and to be present in yourself and be your true self and seek joy and look to what sustains you is how she simplified and became less confused. But she was confused because she was trying to be in too many places and do too many things. And and that simplification was what supported her in moving through the challenges that came afterwards.
Absolutely. And the parallels of the previous lifetime that she'd lived, not as the man, but as the woman whose mother was an amazing seamstress, who happened to be her own mother soul.
Yes.
So the woman that she was, who once her mum died, and she didn't, it was a pretty unremarkable life, really. So maybe some of that was coming through as an agreement in this lifetime for her to do more, achieve more. But
Mm-hmm.
she states herself as well that it was taking away from her family, which were really, really important to her. So
I,
yeah, the idea of simplifying and self-care, it was an amazing story. And so have you had any more correspondence or contact with that lady since the breast cancer and everything that
oh,
went on?
absolutely. And
Mhm.
she does not live far from me. She has sent her daughter, her stepdaughter, and her sister to me to do past life work.
Oh,
And um, she is considering becoming a Newton facilitator, but she has to do the hypnotherapy work. She's very intuitive, and so and I have developed a mentoring relationship. So she and I are in contact with each other. And to me, she is just this amazing light being. She is so full of life and such a joyful person that I'm glad that she's wanting to share herself in more ways, in new ways that are supporting her and not taking away from her.
Yes, absolutely. Good job, Diana. What another recruit for the soul work and the spirit world and Michael
Exactly.
Newton.
Exactly.
Oh my God, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Um, so the second story, this involves, well, it's called Chill and Glow and comes under the chapter for healing. And it involves your client, Marley, who is native of the Netherlands, now living in Tenerife, and she's an entrepreneurial coach. She wants to understand more about the intense light energy she feels. Can you take that up for me?
She she was brought to me. She's working, someone who is working with a life coach who works with young women to get them onto their paths and to support them in being all that they are. And so the coach brought her to me, and we did back to back past life and LBL sessions. And this young woman walks into a room and she just radiates energy. I mean, she's literally bouncing. There's so much energy that supports her. She's like 29, and just this brilliant person who has all of this energy and doesn't know how to focus it, and isn't, I mean, she's young enough that she's yet to reach that mature potential and doesn't know how to focus herself and bring herself into alignment. And so she doesn't know where she wants to live. She has ideas about what she wants to do, but she's kind of all over the place because she has so much energy. And um, in her past lives, I think the what was interesting is that the lives that she went into were very quiet in comparison to where she is now. That the first life as a young man was very introspective. He was all in his brain. He was all inside of himself. It wasn't that he didn't know people, but he didn't need people. He was totally self-contained. And that's a very different kind of person because he never developed intimate relationships. It wasn't something that he needed. And that intimate relationship is something that my client was also interested in, is when am I going to find the person of my dreams, my soulmate? And yet in that past life, it wasn't something that she had. I mean, it was a fairly mundane life, but she went through lives. I'm trying to think about what she went to as the second life. She was a man
Ah, yeah,
who
she
did
was
physical
strong,
labor
and that's right. And Argentina.
in Argentina. The
Yes.
second life was all about family
Yeah.
and all about family connection. So the first life was about being in your head and not having connections. So then we started to investigate connections. And he was definitely not a deep thinker. He was somebody for whom family was everything. And he was totally connected to the sense of family and community as opposed to an individual person. So it was exploring relationship from more community based, even though it was family, it was the greater family. And and the the when she went home, she is dealing with her guide, whose name is Rafi, and
Yeah.
beginning to look at the lives that she's lived and what she learned. And it's like recognizing that she's part of a community, part of a soul group, and their soul group is so excited for her, and that this life that she is in is not about hard work. It's about learning to be present and enjoy and be the joyous spirit that she is.
Yes.
And he keeps telling her to chill, to just relax and be, because she doesn't need to work so hard at having fun. It's
Yes.
about being the joyous being, and that's what she's communicating to the world. And that she doesn't need to stress so much about the work aspects. And so it's learning about this balance of being as opposed to doing, and
Yeah.
recognizing who she is and the work that she's doing simply by being, and bringing that light energy to the people that she is engaged with. And the in terms of relationship, again, it's about being. You don't need so hard to work so hard to make relationships happen. As you step into your light, the light comes to you and you are the light. So it's like relax and be exactly who you are, and you will shine. And she has moved, I think, to Costa Rica. I mean, she's all
Oh,
over the world. She's still online, and she's still doing seminars, and she's still doing things, but she's
yeah.
evolving.
Yes.
She's taking new strides in different directions to bring her light in different ways. But
Do you know what? I often, sorry to interrupt you there,
uh-huh.
Diana. I often think as well, we place so much focus and emphasis on a work-life balance, but we forget the human spiritual balance as well. So it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like, is she integrating that more herself now?
Yeah, I think that's happening. And she's continuing to work with the coach that she was working with before, and who really encourages being your true self. Because when you are your true self, you draw people to you in a way from your true self,
Yeah.
from your true light being. So if you are false, people are going to know that.
Mm.
Yet if you are your true light, that's what you're bringing, and that's what you draw to you.
Oh, so I want to say as well, let's trigger the memory of the life that she had, where we first entered that past life regression, where she was a 36-year-old man. You did some earlier work to find out what had happened in his childhood. He was with a single parent. He was a child of a single parent, and he
Mm-hmm.
then invested his time and energy in science and, in his academia really. And what was he met Maria, a friend that started to develop, um, and what I loved the way it was phrased was she invited him and allowed him to express his trueness. I love that. It was just beautiful. So thank you for
And
that.
it was something that he hadn't expected, because he
Mm,
wasn't looking for it. He, for some reason, he let Maria into his life because he
yeah.
was this very in his head academic scientist who liked having all of the everything clear, no complications, having it simplified. And
Mhm.
Maria just came in spite of him.
Mm,
And he opened to her enough that she touched his soul. And he was afraid, at first, but Maria became the contact that he needed to humanize and to
yeah.
feel the light of connection, even though
Yes.
he wasn't open to intimate connections. And that him and that incarnation was really resistant to close personal connections. He
Yes.
he really resisted, and Maria was just light to him, and he could feel the warmth of her in a way that he never let anybody else in. So she was that, and it just happened. They
Mm.
started working together, and then he allowed that connection to grow.
So interesting that he was very left-brained, and then
Mm-hmm.
this blossoming friendship that was developing something inside of him, maybe not sure what that was, but knew he kind of liked it. But then, bless him, he died at the age of 40, so nothing reached a conclusion, but at least he'd experienced that feeling, some, not a resurgence, but something coming up for him before he died. That was amazing story. Amazing.
And
Thank you.
it brings me back to the first one where the man Hafiz, who is connected to the woman, and she dies, and at the end of that life, he notes that while it was very painful to lose her, he actually had the experience of love.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing here, that he had that experience of connection to Maria that otherwise he would not have had. Even though it was brief, it gave him the knowing that he had the capacity to connect and love and be loved.
Yes, absolutely. Beautiful story. Thank you for that one. We go into number 3 now. Now, this one. So it's out of the darkness comes the light, and it's under the chapter Advanced Guides and Beings. And it involves your client Corinne, who is an artist in her 70s. And she's been on a spiritual journey, a spiritual emergence for many, many years, and doing some very psychological work on herself with your help. And her main issue is the feeling of stagnation and resistance to her art.
So Corinne is a really creative person who, when she first came to me, had been working for years on trying to figure out why she didn't have close relationships in her life, and why in this lifetime she'd been married, she has children, she has good relationships with her children, but in terms of intimate relationships, she'd been married and divorced, and she was trying to figure it all out. What's it all about? She's highly intuitive. So the first journey that I took with her, she went back into a past life. We took her into a past life, and I was very young at being a facilitator. And I said, "Tell me about you." She said, "I'm a frog." It's like, okay. And so I said, okay. And we kind of just described her frogginess. And then I said, okay, well, let's take you back to childhood, thinking that that was just a phase. We took her back, and she went back to being a tadpole.
Oh.
And then she grew older and grew legs and was a frog. And at the end of her froggy life, there was like this silver bullet that encapsulated her, and that she found herself flying out of the earth in this bullet that was really like a pupa, or a vessel that was converting her into spirit. And as it opened, she becomes aware of the soul plane.
Oh.
Really connected with the soul plane. And as I can feel her energy growing. It's like, home, I'm finally connected to home. And so we asked, so tell us about the frog life. Why were you a frog? And her guides are telling her that she was a frog because it had been such a long time since she had incarnated, that she needed to go through life cycle to remember life cycle without having to have the experience of what happened during life.
Right.
So the frog was a very fast life cycle that then could bring her home. So that was my first journey with her. And I was thinking, okay, this is a really interesting person to be having journeys with. So the journey that I'm writing about in this book is about a further journey where she's trying to figure out, why am I here? I don't have connections to my art. I don't want to do art. I don't understand why I don't have friendships, why I'm not connected. And as she goes home, she engages with her guides, and she's always seen guides as her primary guide as a guide that looks sort of like an apostle, an old man with a long beard. And in this instance, she's seeing goddesses instead, and that feminine energy. And she was feeling very unsafe and not knowing what to do. And so we kind of tried to explore that, and they say it's all about your bravery. You know, you're needing to push yourself. This isn't about something, this is part of the journey, is to learn these other steps and to go further. And as she does, she begins to push out of the middle of the path that she is on into parts of the path. And as she does, they illuminate. And she begins to see more and feel more and push herself through fears that are like the fear of what she's going to bump into in the dark. The fears that we have that don't have any solidness to them, but that we carry.
Yeah.
And pushing through that darkness and just trusting that there is light beyond the darkness, and trusting herself to be what she is. And it's so interesting as she goes on this journey of pushing herself, that she's finding out more about who she is and why she incarnated and what her soul is about and what her learning is about. And this is the journey in which she learns that she is in training to be a guide, a guide of young souls. And being a guide of young souls means you're not their friend. You're not here to tell them what to do. You're here to support them and respond to them and support them as they move through their darkness, and support them in being their light and helping them see their light beyond their darkness. And she's having to experience all of these stages herself, and learning that she's a guide. So as she looks at her life, she's seeing, oh, that's why I don't relate to these people, that they don't seem to be on my level. It's because she's being exposed to people not like her on purpose. Yes. So that she can, as she has incarnated, that she is getting in touch with this guide self and how to interact with people in ways that she can be mentoring, but not controlling, not parenting.
Yes. And also not projecting her own life as well.
Her own stuff.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so it was a time that was an opening. This was a particular journey where she had a lot of downloads, and she tends to get downloads. So it's a journey about downloading what she needed to know as a guide. And so sitting within the download, allowing the fullness of the download to happen as she was on this journey. And it's, they wanted her to be fully on a soul level. They want her to live on that soul level so that she is able to be fully herself and be able to be a guide as she is incarnated, but sufficiently within that energy of her soul so that she can support people with that source energy. And it's also interesting about her art. And at this point, she's trying to figure out the art and trying to figure out what about the art and why is there so much resistance. And as a result of this session, she realized that she was living in the house where she had divorced her husband, and she did art to dissociate from the bad marriage. Right. So the art she was doing because of the bad marriage. So she was doing it to get away, and she didn't need to get away from the bad marriage anymore, but she wasn't doing the art because there was the association. And as a result, she moved into a new home and began doing her art in a new way. Because it wasn't dissociative, it was what she enjoyed doing. And so it gave her the ability to move beyond and understand what was stuck and why it wasn't working for her, and to release herself from that and move into a different environment that would support her knowing new people, engaging with different people, being more open to connection with people who weren't like her, and that her art could bridge many different connections without her having to project any kind of need or to have her needing to get something back from it.
And I guess a freedom of creative expression, this new chapter that she'd moved into, was the very tools, skills, abilities to become that guide to help those younger souls that need to express themselves in whatever way without judgment. Amazing, an amazing parallel to that. And Diana, thank you. What a great story. And do you have any follow up with her? Has she been in your life, or is she still doing her artwork? Do you
She's
know?
still
Or...
doing her art. She's been traveling. I haven't been in, I was in contact with her at the time the book was published. In fact, all of the people that I worked with, I sent the article so that they could read it. And they couldn't, it was just like, oh, I'd forgotten bits and pieces of this. Thank you for reminding me of what happened and how powerful this was. I mean, this was a very pivotal point for her, where she made the choice to move out of what was holding her back into the place where art became a positive expression as opposed to a dissociative behavior. And it freed her from that old needing to get away from the marriage. And she's living in a completely different place with different people in her life. I mean, she's still looking for, the partnership, whether that comes or not, I don't know. And I haven't heard from her in the last year. I mean, we had a very brief conversation when the book was being published, but we really haven't. I haven't had her as a client because she's done the work she needed to do.
Yeah, over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Yes, she's moved mountains by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Thank you. A brilliant story. And then the fourth story is about, let me just bring this up here. It's about Dorothy. She's a 67-year-old woman who is a director of a non-profit organization to serve people with disabilities. She's getting ready to transition into retirement, and in an earlier part of her life, she had a near-death experience during a drowning accident, which took her all the way home. Can you pick up the story there for me?
So she's an interesting woman, that she was at this transition point, and she has a husband who has some major physical disabilities, that she was a caregiver, and she didn't want to devolve into simply caregiving if she stopped working. She wanted to have more in her life and know what that more was. When she came to me, the reason that she was looking at having an LBL was because of this near-death experience. And in that near-death experience, she had gone home and experienced this incredible joy and just felt this overwhelming connection and joy, and then came back. And she wanted to experience that again. So she lives about 5 or 6 hours drive from me. And so she drove to my house to do the session. And we did this session, and we didn't get beyond, we got with her guide, but she didn't have that expression of joy. it didn't happen. That what we did was we took her home, and she got home and she was engaging with her guide, and it was peaceful, but there wasn't that big aha joyous moment. And as we were thinking about it and we started talking about it after the session, it was this feeling that something wasn't right. And so I just kept thinking about it and go, what did I do wrong? Of course, we always say, what did I do? What did I do wrong? And so talking to my guides about this, it's like, you didn't go through a death process. You just took her home. When she went before, she went through a death process, and the death process opened up this joyful state. And so I contacted her and said, okay, I feel really bad about this because neither one of us knew how to do it. I'm not blaming myself. I'm just saying, I think that if we had done something different than we did and took you through a death sequence, it would have mirrored the process and you may have experienced something completely different. And if you are willing to come back, I'm willing to redo the session at no cost to you because you're going to have to come back. Are you willing to do that? And she said, absolutely, and came back the next day. I mean, this is a 6-hour drive to come back. And so she came back, and we took her into a place, into a life where she lives up in far northern California, where the giant redwoods are, Humboldt County. And so in her story, she's talking about the forest and the energy of the redwoods and the fairy ring of the redwoods. And redwood trees are very interesting. When you connect with them, you go next to a redwood tree and you get this very cooling energy from it. It's just like they create coolness. And when a redwood tree propagates, it propagates off the roots, and it creates a circle of new trees around the original tree. Wow. And so if the original tree dies, there is a fairy ring created of these new trees. So just to give a little context about the rings, that when she goes into the forest and steps into the fairy ring of trees, it's one of these rings that a dead tree has created life, and it's created it off the roots, even though the original tree is gone. That a redwood tree doesn't die. It creates a circle of new life. And so for her, stepping into those circles, she is beginning to understand and have feeling for her connection to the earth, for the connection to place where she lives, to begin to know about gardens. We went into a garden, and that she's been working too hard. Right. It's basically about moving out of this work, push, work, figure it out, trying to work hard in her mind into a place of being, absorbing, and receiving. And this is an opening for her. So as she's connecting with her counsel, as she is connecting with her guides, she's learning about the energy of the places that she's in. Mm-hmm. So she goes into the meadow and she connects with the flowers. She is in this meadow and she feels the energy of people, but she's not connected to people. All she's feeling is the energy of the people who have been there. Right. So it's like a place where a concert has taken place, that you feel the buzz energy of what has been, that she's feeling that without the people. And that she's sensitive to energy. she doesn't need the people to have the energy.
Mm.
And her guides keep taking her through these levels of energetic connection, and they ultimately take her into a garden. And the garden is about growing, and it's about connecting, and it's about being in connection with the earth. And then there's the horse that she connects with, and the horse is there as a support for her. And she needs supports because she has this life with her husband who she is supporting. And it's like all of this energy that is an array that surrounds her is all there for her.
Mm.
And she's picking up the array that it's all very known to her, but unknown because she hasn't experienced it energetically. And it's all about that replenishing of her energy. And when she goes home, she feels that joy of connection
Yeah.
as she goes home. So this time, because she came through a life, she experienced that joy. And she's able to see that things that are around her are part of humanity and not necessarily things that she needs to engage in and choose.
Yes.
So it's that being able to take a step back, like she's doing in her work. Her work was a nonprofit that served disabled people. To take a step back and see that people make choices, and she does not necessarily need to interact with them in order to see them.
Yes. Yes.
And she has her own personal choices that can be different. And
It's carry on, sorry.
and so there's a sadness that she is feeling with some of these choices that isn't necessarily her sadness. So she's learning about connections, and she can go into her garden, into her grove, and be in connection with the energy of the earth and connect with her guides without necessarily needing to guide or to be part of the choices of others.
Yes. This for our viewers as well. It all starts with me. That's the name of the story, and it's under the chapter Healing the Earth. Absolutely beautiful. Have you been in contact recently with Dorothy at all? And
I was in contact with her around the story and
right.
having her read it, and it she appreciated being able to read it again and
Yes.
to be reminded of what she had learned. So
Yes.
even though the big pieces were still with her, it's like those little details coming back. And she lives in a place where she can be in harmony with nature. It's just very easy to forget when you connect to the sadness and the woes of humanity.
Absolutely. And I think as well, just being in connection is an acknowledgement of its existence and an appreciation of it. And I think, again, just having that connection with the nature, it's like, and hearing her story and reading her story again, it's a reactivation. It's like neuroplasticity. It starts more downloads happening and more synchronicities and that. It's lovely, really lovely, beautiful, beautiful detailed stories. Thank you so much, Diana.
Oh, you're
Thank you.
welcome. I mean,
Thank
I
you.
think that the thing that's interesting with Dorothy's story and the work is that whether you're a facilitator or a client,
Mm.
if you're not getting what you need, talk it out,
Yes.
bring it up. Because in this case, she didn't get what she needed. And we talked enough about it that I kept thinking about it. And we went back and did it again. When we went back the second time, she got exactly what she needed
Mm.
because our guides were working with us to help us figure out what hadn't happened. And so I'd say don't give up, but explore together
Yeah.
what you need. And that's for people who are thinking about doing this work. It's always good to talk to the person you're working with.
Absolutely, because it's a cohesive, collaborative role. It's your teacher and student for each other, because I know when we do our sessions, we learn so much through them, and the trust that you have in your guides, and the trust that Dorothy put in you, and the integrity that you had to follow this through, to think, what else could I have done? But again, it's nothing that you've done wrong. It's just an expansion for
Mhm.
both of you. Amazing insight, and really amazing. Thank you, Diana. I love that story. I loved all of them actually, because they were so detailed, and they were page turners. They were real stories of how the people have grown through their experiences, and
Mhm.
a bit like coaching. If you do that, you get that. If you do that, you get this, and the choices that they have, because often people come for the work we do, especially with LBL. Not so much hypnotherapy these days, but with LBL work, it's not mainstream work. And for some people, it's a last chance, because they've tried, their humanness has tried to problem solve and be solution focused, and it hasn't got them where they want to. So to come for these kind of sessions, they open and offer up so much. And it's a bit like coaching, isn't it? You
Mhm.
learn so much, and then the practical application of the insights that they've garnered and gained from what they've done is amazing. Thank you. That's
You're
amazing.
welcome. And I think that brings me to um, just a short comment about the foreword that I wrote,
Yes.
because the foreword I wrote is about storytelling and the value of storytelling. And why Michael chose stories. I mean, we have this journal called Stories of the Afterlife. Why stories? And our brains are attuned to stories. We learn through stories because we make connections. And
Mm.
so you tell a story and it connects to something you already know. So
Mm.
someone, as a child, we like listening to stories, and we get our imagination is fed with stories. And it adds to our understanding of the world and our understanding of ourselves. And we're always building on the stories that we have inside of us. And
Yeah.
so when we read another story, we're connecting to, what do I know about that? So if I'm reading about Dorothy in the redwoods, I know about the circles, the fairy circles, and I can tell you about the fairy circles.
Yeah.
And so it's a teaching opportunity that we learn when we're reading. We're reading something about somebody else that we can apply to ourselves, and we're always working in story loops. And when we're doing therapy, one of the things we're doing is looking at the stories we're telling ourselves and
Mm.
see whether the stories we're telling ourselves are helping us or undermining us. And can those
Yes.
stories be changed? Can we shift a story because we have a belief associated with it, and make it a story that is fulfilling as opposed to full of sadness.
Yeah.
And so how we learn generally is through stories. And Michael found that it was a way to communicate easily without getting into the scientific detail, and speak to people in a language that most of us would understand. That by telling a story, he could convey meaning without having to go into the intense psychoanalytical detail
Mm.
that would be common language for him, but not for us.
Yes. And of
So,
course, what we understand is that the, imagination and the storytelling and the feeling that that generates into us, it is the language of the soul. It's how it communicates.
mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So I'm very grateful to Michael for learning about storytelling and giving us this gift of communicating stories that he did through Journey of Souls. And it's amazing to me how a book that was of stories from the 70s and 80s is still out there moving from hand to hand through people, and in the same way that it has, for the last 40 years. And
Yes.
and that people pick it up and they still resonate with it. And to me, that shows the timelessness of storytelling.
Absolutely. And how many times have you picked up, but you might have, for example, we have a lady here in the UK called Diana Cooper, and she's known as the British angel lady. She works with all sorts of things. She's a beautiful soul. She's in her 70s now. And I read one of her books maybe about 23, 24 years ago, The Power of Inner Peace, which interestingly enough talks about why the soul would choose that particular type of person or that particular relationship because of what it's got to learn. But my point here is I read it, and I think I then read it about 5 years later. I read a different story with different meaning because of where I was on my own journey through my experiences. Then I read it again about 8 years later, again a different story. So it's the meaning we add to it, isn't it, that brings about the story and the coherence and what we understand. So it's storytelling is amazing, absolutely amazing. Thank you.
And each of us has our own stories.
Yes.
We've gone through this process of learning our own stories, and I find that because we've experienced it, we can help others understand how stories can be supportive, and also to understand why in a story something happens or it doesn't happen. It's like being in a life where there are no people in your life with you. Why does that happen? And helping people understand, no, you weren't a hermit. You just didn't store emotional memory of people. Doesn't mean they weren't there. You just didn't store the memory of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
thank you, Diana. Do you have any final words that you would like to say? Not necessarily about the stories, but anything you'd like to say or offer us, or anything that you just need to say before we finish?
I'd really like to point people who are interested in these stories to the journal that is behind this book. And it's a quarterly journal called Stories of the Afterlife. And if you go to the Newton website, newtoninstitute.org, you can sign up for our Stories of the Afterlife. It usually has 4 or 5 stories in each issue. It's published quarterly. And you will have access to the archive of stories back to 2018 or 19. And I find that there are so many different stories and views, and there's so much good stuff that's in Stories of the Afterlife, and not very many people know about it. It's wonderful to have this as a book because it gets this into the hands of a new audience.
Absolutely.
But if you want to read more and read the stories as they are coming out, take a look at Stories of the Afterlife. It's not very expensive. It's like $25 a year. So that's pretty inexpensive as a subscription. The Newton Institute is really involved in supporting you connecting to your soul and to consciousness. That's what we're here to do. And if reading stories of others supports you in that way and supports your curiosity, go further. Read other stories. Go onto our website. Browse our facilitators. Find some facilitators that you might be interested in working with. Contact them, interview them. See if there is work that you can do for yourself.
Yeah.
Because when you're ready, you will be called to this work.
Yes.
And it will change your life. It absolutely does change your life. And sometimes we have to be ready for that change because it takes courage to actually make that change.
Yes.
And that's hard at times. I've told people that in times of transition, we may not know whether the light at the end of the tunnel is daylight or a train coming towards us. And if you're in a long transition or a painful one, it feels like you're going to get run over by a train again.
Yes.
And it takes courage to stay on the path and seek the light outside. And
Absolutely.
doing this work can support you and remind you of the resources that you have and the being that you are, because you are more than this incarnation.
Yeah.
You are a soul who is a part of all there is, and all there is love, and you are love. And we forget this when we come into our human bodies.
Yeah.
So when it's your time, reconnect, and we will be here for you to support you and help you in your journey.
Beautiful, Diana. And finally, how can our viewers connect with you, Diana?
I am listed on the Newton website, and my website, I have two of them. One is dpconsulting.biz, B-I-Z, and the other is like San Francisco, sfbayregressions.com. And I'm listed on the Newton website. I work in person in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I work online as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Diana,
Thank
it's
you.
been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for your time, and I
Thank
wish
you.
you well. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you.